But his basic theory for telling people about how the budget works and what we could do about it was to get a long board, and on it he had put a number of things that are very like this listing of the various government agencies here that have budgets. And most of them were empty, except for one that he had a long spool and that he put a stack of Oreo cookies on. When he started doing this, he decided that each Oreo cookie should be worth $10 billion. When he started doing this 5-6 years ago only, there were only 45 Oreo cookies on that stack. The most recent demonstration I saw on YouTube had 50 cookies on that stack. We're actually proposing a budget that would have nearly 55 cookies on that stack. He has an expert at his website, truemajority.org, which, again, I find to be a good source of information. I don't necessarily subscribe to everything that he does there. But he has an expert who worked for the first Bush in the Department of Defense, who says that if we trashed some of our huge weapon systems that were meant for a Cold War threat that doesn't exist in the current world, took them out of the budget, we could probably find about $60 billion in the current defense budget to take out. And he shows how if he took the 6 Oreo cookies off the defense budget, that that would still leave us, since currently China, which is the next highest spender, spending about $100 billion a year on their military. Well, exceeding them, seriously exceeding the next spender, which is Russia. And in fact, it turns out that we spend more money on our defense every single year, year after year after year, than every other nation on the planet combined. Now again, I understand, and we talked about it a little bit here, that if we take some money out of the Department of Defense budget, they're going to want to close bases. And we know what the economic impact would have been if they'd have closed the naval base here. So, yes, there is an economic consequence to shifting these things from one place to another. But we still have to think about what are our priorities and what do we want to do with our Oreo cookies. He found that with 5 or 6 of these cookies, that he could fix every school that was in need of repair and build schools in places that needed them but didn't have them yet. And he could do that with, I think, 1 cookie, right? The $10 billion would do that. He also found that he could pay for health care for every child in the country who didn't at that point in time have it. That number has grown. He did that with just 1 cookie. It might take a cookie and a half or 2 cookies these days. Again, when he first started doing this, it was during the middle of the Bush Jr. administration. And so, again, by repositioning the Oreo cookies as he did, he showed us we could change our priorities and we could actually fund many of the services we want to fund here. He even came up with, in one example, where he had a cookie left over, which of course he said, gee, we can either eat that one or, we could, horror of horrors, use that to pay down on the deficit, which of course would leave us more cookies in the future to spend on social services. Again, one of the places that, and he also has a demonstration that shows this, where we could cut down without doing serious harm to our ability to defend ourselves, is in the nuclear area. Currently, the average nuclear warhead we have has about 15 times the detonation power of the Hiroshima bomb. It's estimated that 6 of these could take out the entire Russian. We have thousands. Thousands don't protect us any more than hundreds might. And we spend about $17 billion a year maintaining these and designing new delivery mechanisms and other such things for these nukes. It would do a lot, I think, towards our standing in the world and our ability to tell other people, like the North Koreans and like the Iranians, we don't think you should develop this sort of weaponry if we cut back on the amount we had here. It's not very credible when your overkill ratio is hundreds to say, you know, we don't want you to have something that couldn't actually take out the whole planet. So then the last thing I wanted to talk to you about tonight, and the last page, well, it's the next to last page, but the last page I took out of the OMB site. It's the National Science Foundation page. As we all know, most innovation is going to come from science. Right? That is sort of how we learn how to build better things. It's how we, learn to build new things. It's through the scientific method and scientific R&D. And the key thing I took out of this page is that if we look at the top bullet point right under funding highlights, it says provide $7.4 billion for the National Science Foundation, and that's an 8% increase. So if you're looking at, the percentage of increase, that's twice what the Department of Defense got. But if you just look at the raw funding, $7.4 billion, it turns out to be 1.348151% according to my phone's calculator of the DoD budget. And yes, this is not the only scientific R&D going on in the country. That some of the other places here in the budget would have things that would relate to scientific discovery. That would be NASA, the Department of Energy, even the Veterans Administration probably has some part of its budget, again, because they do have hospitals and do provide medicine. There probably is some money there that is creating science. The Corps of Engineers, Civil Works, the Environmental Protection Agency, and even the Department of Defense itself. However, most of the science we've ever gotten from the Department of Defense is how to destroy things, not actually how to make things that are better. So while those places might fund scientific R&D, and of course, not all R&D in science and not all innovation takes place because the federal government spends money. Some of it does happen privately. In the 60s, NASA had a much bigger budget than it does now, at least in terms of its percentage of GDP. Might not be in actual dollars any bigger than it is today. And we got things like microwave ovens and Tang and Corningware and all sorts of great things out of the project to put a man on the moon. We have cooking spray, Pan. It's one of the things we got out of that effort. And there is no doubt that we all live better lives now because we made that effort in the 60s and that science was there. Certainly, that helped spur the growth of computers in the country. And it turns out that that is one thing we can thank the Department of Defense for. The first working internet was actually a DoD thing called the ARPANET.